The humid air hung thick and heavy, a suffocating blanket that seemed to press down on the town. It was late October, and the change in the wind had brought with it a chill that seeped into my bones, a stark contrast to the lingering warmth of the day. I live in an old Victorian house, the kind with creaky floors, drafty windows that seem to whisper secrets to the night, and a pervasive sense of history that feels both comforting and unsettling. It's a beautiful place, really, with its ornate woodwork and high ceilings, but sometimes, especially on nights like this, the beauty gives way to a palpable unease, a feeling of being watched. My town, Havenwood, isn't known for its vibrant nightlife or bustling crowds. It's a quiet coastal community, nestled between rolling hills and the moody gray expanse of the sea. It's steeped in history and a sense of isolation that some find comforting, a refuge from the chaos of the outside world. For others, it's an eerie sort of quiet, a stillness that borders on the unsettling. For me, it's always been a bit of both, a place of solace and a place where the veil between worlds feels a little thinner. Most of the year, the rhythms of life here are gentle, the days passing with a predictable ease. But when the days grow shorter, and the nights grow long, things seem to shift. There's a palpable change in the atmosphere, a sense of something lurking just beneath the surface. I had just settled into my favorite armchair, a worn leather piece that had molded perfectly to my shape over the years. A book lay open in my lap, a collection of old ghost stories that I usually reserved for rainy afternoons, but tonight, it felt appropriate. A steaming cup of Earl Grey tea sat on the side table, its fragrant steam mingling with the musty scent of the old house. As I turned the page, a sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, sending a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. The power flickered, the lights dimming and then strengthening erratically. The old house groaned, its timbers protesting the sudden shift in the weather. I sighed, a familiar mix of annoyance and resignation, and rose to check the circuit breaker, thinking it was just the usual storm-related hiccup. Havenwood was notorious for its erratic power grid, especially during storms. However, even after resetting the breaker, the lights only flickered weakly before dying completely, leaving me in the enveloping darkness. A wave of frustration washed over me, but I quickly adjusted and pulled out my phone, using the flashlight feature as my guide. The storm had picked up dramatically, the wind now howling outside, and the rhythmic crashing of the waves against the shore had become a deafening cacophony. The trees in my yard were swaying violently, their branches thrashing against the house like skeletal arms. I decided that I had had enough of this. The atmosphere in the house was becoming more and more oppressive, and I needed to get some sleep. I resolved to go to bed early. On the way up the creaky, wooden stairs, each step groaning under my weight, I noticed the distinct feeling of being watched. It wasn't the usual sensation that comes with being alone in an old house, but something more deliberate, more focused. I dismissed it as my imagination running wild, the fear and the growing darkness playing tricks on my mind. But the prickling sensation on the back of my neck persisted, even as I laid down in bed, pulling the duvet over my head. My thoughts raced, from the increasingly violent storm raging outside to the strange, unsettling feeling that kept me awake, a constant awareness of something being not quite right. I tossed and turned, the feeling of being watched growing stronger with each passing minute, until finally, fatigue overcame my fear and I drifted into a restless sleep. I don't know how long I slept for, but when I woke up, it wasn't to the comforting sound of the waves. Instead, there was this unnerving scraping sound coming from directly beneath my bedroom. It was as if something was dragging itself across the floorboards, a slow, deliberate movement that made my heart pound in my chest, sending shivers down my spine. The fear I'd felt earlier returned tenfold, a cold wave of dread washing over me. I grabbed my phone and switched on the flashlight, the dim light casting long, dancing shadows across the room, turning familiar objects into sinister shapes. I reached over to the nightstand and grabbed a heavy candlestick, an ornate brass piece that I usually used for decorative purposes. Holding it up like a club, I cautiously approached the bedroom door. I opened the door as quietly as I could, the old hinges groaning in protest, and stepped onto the landing, shining the light down into the hall below. The shadows seemed to writhe in the light, playing tricks on my eyes, and the house was filled with an oppressive silence, punctuated only by the now louder scraping sound. It wasn't coming from downstairs, as I had originally thought. It was coming from the attic, directly above me. The attic was a place I rarely went, a dusty, forgotten space filled with forgotten relics of the past. It was where old furniture, family heirlooms, and discarded belongings went to collect dust and memories. I didn't want to go up there now, but my curiosity, coupled with my terror, compelled me to investigate. I had to know what was making that sound. I slowly made my way to the narrow staircase leading to the attic, each wooden step groaning and creaking under my weight, a symphony of unease. With each step, the scraping sound grew louder, more distinct. It was the sound of nails, long and sharp, clawing at the wood, dragging themselves across the floorboards as if trying to gain purchase on the slick, aged wood. As I reached the top of the stairs, I could feel the temperature drop noticeably, and a thick, musty smell filled the air, a combination of dust, decay, and something else, something indefinable, something that smelled disturbingly wrong. The attic was dark, save for the thin, wavering beam of my flashlight, which was barely enough to penetrate the gloom. The scattered boxes, draped with cobwebs, loomed like specters in the shadows, their shapes distorted by the darkness. The scraping sound was now directly in front of me, coming from the very center of the room. I shone my flashlight towards the source of the sound, and my breath hitched in my throat, my blood turning to ice in my veins. Standing in the middle of the attic was a figure, tall and gaunt, its silhouette stark against the shadows. Its skin was pale and stretched taut over its bones, giving it an almost skeletal appearance, and its eyes were dark and hollow, devoid of any light or life. It was wearing a tattered old dress, made of some heavy, faded fabric, the kind I'd seen in old photographs of the house, dresses that had been worn by generations of women who had lived here. The dress was stained and torn, and it seemed to cling to the figure's emaciated body. Its long, bony fingers were digging into the attic floorboards, the nails scratching and scraping against the wood, making the unnerving sound that had drawn me up here. I tried to speak, but no sound came out. My muscles were frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. The figure slowly raised its head, and the black pits that were its eyes seemed to bore into me, a vacant, empty stare that was both unnerving and terrifying. A strange, ghastly smile spread across its face, a grotesque contortion of its features that revealed rows of long, sharp teeth, like those of a predator. It moved suddenly, the thin limbs twitching as if pulled by invisible strings, its body contorting into unnatural shapes. It took a step towards me, and the smell emanating from it hit me, a foul odor of decay, like rotting meat and old earth, and I finally found my voice, a strangled scream that was cut short by the terror gripping me. I dropped my phone, the flashlight clattering to the floor, and the heavy candlestick fell from my grip, landing with a dull thud. I turned to flee, scrambling down the stairs as fast as my shaking legs would carry me. I didn't dare look back. I could hear the scraping behind me, much faster now, more frantic. It was right on my heels, its heavy footfalls echoing through the house as it followed me down the stairs. I tripped on the last step, my hand hitting the floor so hard that I thought I had broken my wrist. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the pain, and darted into the living room, slamming the door behind me. My hands trembled as I tried to lock it, but my fingers fumbled with the bolt, making me miss it several times. I heard a loud thump from the other side of the door, as the figure slammed into it, testing its strength, as if it knew it couldn't get out just yet. I ran through the house, locking the doors and windows, the scraping sound echoing through the rooms as it continued to chase me. My heart was pounding in my chest, each beat a heavy drum against my ribs. I couldn't think of what to do, my mind a whirlwind of panic and terror. My thoughts were a flood of disjointed images of what I had seen in the attic, the figure's skeletal hands, its hollow eyes, and its ghastly smile, burning into my memory like a brand. I had to get away, but where could I go? I ran into the kitchen and hid under the table, a solid oak piece that had been in the house for as long as I could remember. It was a small space, barely enough for me to squeeze into, but it offered a semblance of shelter. I prayed that it wouldn't find me here. The scraping sound was now coming from right outside, from the wall beside the table. I could hear the nails scratching against the exterior of the house, an unnerving, rhythmic sound as it circled the building, always getting closer. I pulled my knees into my chest and tried to quiet my breathing, hoping against hope that I could remain undetected. I could hear its movements now, a shuffling, dragging sound, moving in a strange, unnatural rhythm that made my skin crawl. The house seemed to be holding its breath along with me, each creak and groan amplified in the suffocating silence. Then, the silence came, a sudden, absolute stillness. It was worse than the scraping. The silence was heavy, pregnant with anticipation, filled with a tension that was almost unbearable. I could feel my body shaking, despite all my efforts to remain still, each muscle trembling with fear. I held my breath as I waited, my heart feeling like it was about to explode out of my chest. Just when I thought it was safe, just when I started to think that maybe, just maybe, it had gone, the kitchen window shattered. The glass exploded inwards, showering me with shards that bounced off my face, cutting my skin, a million tiny pricks of pain. I screamed, throwing myself backwards, away from the window, covering my head with my arms. There, standing in the gaping hole in the wall, framed by the jagged edges of the broken glass, was the figure from the attic. It had broken the window out and was staring right at me, its dark eyes fixed on my face. Its ghastly smile widened, and it reached a long, skeletal hand towards me, its thin fingers twitching as it moved, its voice raspy and guttural as it spoke, its words a whisper of dread that seemed to burrow deep into my soul. "You can't hide from me." I didn't hesitate. I bolted out from under the table and ran towards the back door, the fear fueling my movements. I threw the bolt and ran into the garden. The rain was coming down in sheets, the wind howling, making it difficult to run, but the terror that gripped me propelled me forward. I could hear the figure crashing through the house behind me, hot on my heels. I didn't dare look back, knowing that the mere sight of it would be enough to fill me with dread. I ran as fast as I could through the garden, stumbling over the wet grass and tangled vines. I climbed over the fence, ripping my clothes, and ran out into the street, not knowing where I was going but knowing I had to get as far away from that house as I possibly could. The figure was gaining on me and, with a desperate burst of speed, I ran towards the center of the town, the only place I could think of that might offer some safety. I didn't care that I was soaked to the bone and out of breath. I ran into the police station, bursting through the doors, my hair plastered to my face, breathless and terrified, a wild-eyed figure seeking refuge from the storm that had followed me from my home. The officer behind the desk looked up in surprise, his eyes widening at my disheveled appearance. "Help me," I gasped, my voice hoarse and trembling. "There's something in my house. It's after me." I told them everything that I could remember, starting with the initial power outage, the strange scraping sounds, and what I had seen in the attic, culminating with the horrifying vision of the figure breaking through the kitchen window. They listened patiently, but I could see that they were skeptical, their expressions a mixture of concern and disbelief. I insisted that they come with me, that they see what I had seen, and they hesitantly agreed, perhaps out of curiosity more than a genuine belief in my story. We arrived back at the house, the storm was beginning to die down, the wind had subsided and the rain was slowing to a drizzle. The streetlights illuminated the house, its windows dark, and it seemed as if the terrifying events of the previous hour had never happened. The police officers, their expressions now more professional than curious, searched the house, top to bottom, from the attic to the cellar. They confirmed the broken kitchen window, the shards of glass still scattered on the floor, but they found nothing else. No figure, no evidence of anyone else being there. Everything else was as it should be, perfectly normal, as if nothing had happened. I tried to explain what I had seen, again, emphasizing the details, but they looked at me with pity in their eyes, the same look that people give to the deranged. They suggested I had been experiencing some kind of hallucination, a vivid dream, or a night terror brought on by the storm and the stress. They gave me a card to a local psychiatrist and told me to call them. They left, and I was left alone in the house, with a broken window and the lingering feeling of unease, a heavy weight in the pit of my stomach. I felt as though I was being watched, the feeling even stronger now than before, as if the figure was still there, unseen but very much present. The silence of the house was more oppressive than ever, filled with the echoes of the scraping sound and the whisper of, "You can't hide from me." I spent the rest of the night in the living room, with all the lights on, trying to make sense of what had happened, but my mind kept coming back to that figure. I knew what I had seen wasn't a dream. It was too vivid, too real. It was an experience that had shaken me to my core. I've since had the house thoroughly checked. I've installed new security systems, replacing the old, faulty ones that the house had, and I've replaced the kitchen window with a stronger, more secure one. But I still feel its presence. I still hear the scratching sometimes, in the dead of night, when the wind picks up and the old house groans. It's faint, just on the edge of hearing, but it's there, a constant reminder of what happened that night. I know it's still here, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment. Watching. And I know, deep down, that it won't be long before it comes for me again. The house feels different now, tainted by the experience. The sense of unease is now a constant companion, a pervasive feeling that never leaves, a reminder that my home is no longer safe, that somewhere, in the dark, something is watching, waiting. The old lighthouse stood sentinel against the bruised purple of the twilight sky, its beam a futile sweep against the encroaching darkness. I'd always found it strangely comforting, a stoic landmark in the vast, unpredictable expanse of the sea. But tonight, the familiar rhythm of its light seemed to stutter, casting long, distorted shadows that danced like spectral figures across the jagged rocks below. The salt-laced wind carried with it a mournful cry, not of gulls, but something else. Something that made the hairs on the back of my neck prickle with unease. I'm a marine biologist, and my research often takes me to remote locations. This time, it was to a small, windswept island off the coast of Maine, a place locals referred to as Whisper Isle, mostly due to the constant winds that seemed to murmur secrets through the craggy landscape. The island was sparsely populated, with only a handful of families who had lived there for generations, their lives intimately tied to the sea. They were a quiet, insular people, with a guarded respect for the island and its mysteries. They hadn't been keen on my presence, their eyes holding a wary skepticism that made me feel like an intruder in their world. My research cabin was a small, weathered structure, perched precariously on the edge of a cliff overlooking the ocean. It was functional, if not luxurious, and usually the solitude was a welcome respite from the chaos of the mainland. But this time, the silence felt different, heavy, and oppressive, punctuated by the relentless crash of the waves against the rocks and the eerie cries carried on the wind. I had spent the day cataloging samples, meticulously documenting the diverse marine life that thrived in the frigid waters surrounding the island. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of fiery orange and deep indigo, I felt a sense of completion, a satisfaction that came from a day spent in pursuit of knowledge. But as I gathered my equipment and prepared to head back to my cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I turned around, my heart pounding in my chest, but the rocky coastline was empty, save for the stoic lighthouse standing guard in the distance. I dismissed it as fatigue, a product of a long day spent in the sun and wind. I picked up my pace, the uneasy feeling gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. The path back to the cabin was narrow and winding, shrouded in the growing darkness, and the wind seemed to whisper through the tall grass, carrying with it the same strange cry I had heard earlier. It wasn't human, but it wasn't animal either, a mournful sound that resonated deep within my bones. I reached the cabin, pushing the heavy wooden door open, the hinges groaning in protest. The interior was dimly lit, the shadows clinging to the corners like dark, watchful eyes. I lit a kerosene lamp, the flickering flame casting long, dancing shadows across the walls, turning familiar objects into strange, distorted shapes. I ate a simple dinner, the silence broken only by the crackling of the fire in the small stove and the rhythmic drumming of the rain against the windows. The storm was getting closer, the wind howled with more force now, and the lighthouse beam swept across the window in sporadic bursts of light, like a strobe, creating brief moments of stark illumination, followed by longer periods of darkness. As I prepared for bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone. The silence in the cabin was heavier now, broken only by the wind and the strange cries that seemed to weave through the gaps in the walls. I pulled the blanket around me, my body tense, listening intently to the sounds outside. I closed my eyes, hoping to drift into a peaceful sleep, but my mind was racing, replaying the events of the day, focusing on the unsettling feeling of being watched, the strange cries carried by the wind, and the way the lighthouse beam had seemed to falter. I don't know how long I lay there, my eyes wide open in the darkness, but eventually, I drifted into a restless sleep, filled with disturbing dreams of dark, swirling waters, and the mournful cries of something that lurked beneath the surface. I woke up with a start, my heart pounding in my chest, my body drenched in a cold sweat. The cabin was shrouded in darkness, the lamp having burned out. I reached for my phone, but it was dead, a cold, useless weight in my hand. The power was out, presumably from the storm. The wind was howling outside, the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks was deafening, and I realized the storm was now directly upon me. But amidst the cacophony of the storm, I could hear something else, a soft, rhythmic tapping coming from the roof of the cabin. It was a slow, deliberate sound, like gentle fingers drumming against the wood. I sat up in bed, my body frozen with a mix of fear and curiosity, straining my ears to hear more, but as quickly as the sound started, it ceased, leaving only the relentless noise of the storm. I tried to rationalize what I had heard, telling myself that it was likely just the wind or a branch scraping against the roof. But the feeling of unease lingered, like a cold, heavy weight in the pit of my stomach. I reached out and grabbed a thick, heavy book from the nightstand, my hand shaking slightly, and decided to brave the darkness, intent on making sure I was alone in the cabin. I cautiously made my way to the door, pushing it open, a gust of wind and rain immediately assaulting my face. The night was pitch black, the lighthouse beam obscured by the storm, and the rain was coming down in sheets. I stepped onto the small porch, and immediately the rhythmic tapping sound started again. This time, it was louder, clearer. It was coming from the edge of the roof, directly above the porch. I strained my eyes to see through the darkness, the wind whipping my hair across my face, and my heart skipped a beat. Perched on the edge of the roof, its silhouette stark against the gray sky, was a creature, unlike anything I had ever seen before. It was humanoid in form, but its skin was pale and slick, like the skin of a sea creature, and its limbs were long and thin, its fingers unnaturally elongated. Its head was too large for its body, its face smooth, with large, black eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness. It was tapping its long fingers against the roof, the sound echoing eerily in the storm. The creature turned its head and looked directly at me, and I felt a cold, paralyzing fear grip me, a primal terror that made my blood run cold. Its black eyes seemed to bore into my soul, and I felt as if it could see every secret thought, every fear, every weakness. It raised a thin hand, its fingers twitching, and I felt as if it was beckoning me. I stumbled backward, hitting my back against the doorframe, my voice caught in my throat, unable to scream, my mind reeling at the sight of it. The creature lowered itself from the roof with an unnatural grace and started gliding towards me, not walking, not flying, but gliding, its movements fluid and unnatural. It stopped at the edge of the porch, its black eyes fixed on mine. A whisper, soft and chilling, seemed to echo from within its skull, a sound that was both words and something else, something older, something that spoke to a deep, primal part of me. It said, "You are not welcome here." I finally found my voice, a strangled scream that was lost in the wind and the crashing waves, and I ran back into the cabin, slamming the door shut, fumbling with the lock. I could hear the creature gliding across the porch, its movements swift and silent, pressing itself against the door, its soft, cold form making the wooden door creak ominously. I ran through the cabin, knocking over furniture, desperate to find some way to escape. The wind was howling outside, the waves were crashing against the rocks, and the rhythmic tapping of the creature against the cabin was now incessant, a constant reminder of what was outside. I found the small window at the back of the cabin and pried it open, a gust of wind and rain immediately engulfing me. I didn't hesitate. I climbed through the window and ran into the storm. I ran blindly through the darkness, the rain pelting my face, the wind whipping my body, not knowing where I was going, driven only by the primal need to escape. I could hear the creature behind me, gliding through the storm, its movements silent and swift, its black eyes burning through the darkness. I stumbled over rocks and fallen branches, my body bruised and battered, but I kept running, fueled by fear and adrenaline. I ran to the edge of the island, to the rocky outcropping that overlooked the sea. The waves were crashing against the rocks, sending up great sprays of water, and the wind was howling, a deafening roar that seemed to swallow everything. I was trapped, surrounded by the sea on three sides and the creature behind me. I turned to face my pursuer, and as the storm briefly parted, the lighthouse beam illuminated it, revealing its horrifying form in all its grotesque details. It stood there, a pale, otherworldly figure, its black eyes burning like hot coals. It lifted a thin, webbed hand, its fingers twitching, and whispered again, "You are not welcome here. This island belongs to us." I screamed, a scream of utter terror, and lost my footing on the rocks. I fell into the churning waters below, the waves immediately pulling me under. The water was cold, the darkness overwhelming, and I felt myself losing consciousness, the cries of the creature echoing in my ears as I sank below the surface. I don't know how long I was in the water, but eventually, I was pulled from the sea by the local fishermen, who had seen my cabin window broken and had come looking for me. They were reluctant to speak about what had happened that night, their faces pale with fear, their eyes holding a knowledge that I couldn't comprehend. They brought me to the mainland, and I never returned to Whisper Isle. The locals warned me never to go back, that the creatures of the deep were ancient and unforgiving, and that the island was a place best left undisturbed. I have never been able to shake the memory of that night, of the tapping on the roof, of the pale creature with its black eyes and its webbed hands. Sometimes, when the wind howls and the sea is restless, I can still hear its whispers, a chilling reminder of the night I encountered something that shouldn't exist, something that claimed that island for itself. The ocean feels different to me now, a vast, unknowable expanse filled with mysteries that are best left undisturbed.